So what when they've got these issues, obviously your job is to help people with these reviews when they come up. What do you advise the people do to try and avoid that action and trying to avoid that review that could put their license in jeopardy?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the circumstances. That inevitably every licensed premises in the country will have issues at some point. You'll never stop that. It really comes down to what Rachel touched on in the beginning. We're a people business, we're a people industry. That lends to not only dealing with your staff and your customers and having that smiley face, but it's all about relationships. It's building relationships with your neighbours. It's building relationships with the authorities as well, so that if the worst does happen, at least you've got that bridge that you can speak to them and as long as you're reasonable and they are on the other side, that you've got some chance of being able to navigate your way through it and avoiding the worst type of enforcement action. Unfortunately, it does happen. Unfortunately, it does sometimes cost money. Unfortunately, sometimes it leads to people losing their licenses, but it's really the work that you can do before, but it's also training your staff as well, which when you've got a high churn or you're struggling to get staff, that can be really difficult.
It's not just what you're saying there as well. It's about relationships as well with the local authorities, the police, the local residents as well, residents associations.
Exactly.
The amount of pubs and clubs and bars around Soho that are getting shut down because people are moving into Soho and then complaining about noise is ridiculous. But that's not really helped as well by the other impacts and the other cost of living crisis that's being brought on by us. We've just got a new government come in, and that's then going to introduce to us further challenges down the line of what's the laws coming next. Rachel was talking earlier about planning ahead. You can't really plan ahead unless you know what's coming, and at the moment it's all a little bit up in the air. I know we've just had the election, we've had some announcements, but then we've got local governments as well and other restrictions. You've got things like ULEZ being expanded, you've got the congestion charge, you've got parking restrictions which are coming in everywhere. The cost of parking skyrocketed. That's reducing people want to go places. So who's going to help out with that on the government side? Do we start lobbying them for stuff like that? What's the answer there, do you think?
I think that's always been the answer. I mean, in terms of legislation, we've had changes recently to the pavement licence regime. So that did get changed during COVID because it used to be quite a long, convoluted process. And to be fair to the government at the time, they did move swiftly to make that more streamlined and cheaper for operators. So that's now been enshrined in new law that we've got. That's not now the sort of extended law from the pandemic. So that's reduced the burden, it's reduced costs. It also means people can put more seating outside if they want to. It's just an easier process. It also means that, heaven forbid, we end up in another situation like before. We know we can adapt. You can seat people outside. You've got that option. In terms of other things, I mean, Martin's Law is a classic example. So this is the anti-terrorism legislation that's been tabled in our previous government. It's been sort of passed over in the wash-up provisions that have gone over from the Tory government to the Labour government, but we still don't actually have any draft legislation that is moving through Parliament at the moment. So we know that something is coming. We've got a rough idea of potentially what it may look like, but there was headlines of the average cost of the implementation of this being £80,000, which when you say that to operators that are already struggling, is quite a lot to take on. It now transpires that that's probably going to be the sort of 800 plus capacity larger venues, but even still, if you run a large venue, with the pressures of everything else, you can quite easily see how it all mounts up and venues just don't become viable anymore.
One of the largest club brands in the UK is not long gone busts.
Exactly.
They were trying to say to reassure staff, say we're still open, we're going to be open. Don't worry about your job. And then within a matter of, I think it was a couple of weeks, they just said sorry that venues are not going to open anymore, and that was it. They were rolled up.
Yeah, and we talked about, I mean, the conversation previously, we've talked about, economies of scales and big pub companies that can absorb those costs to an extent. You do look at that particular operator and you think, if they can't make nightclubs work, what hope is there, for anybody else? Yeah, that's exactly it.
But sometimes it does have that adverse effect that you've grown so much, and then your margins become so small. Again, Alison was earlier talking about the Tide pubs because their margins are small.
Yes.
If there's any changes you know, and if you're stuck into a contract with your landlord, if your rents go up all of a sudden, and that's your margin gone.
Exactly.
You're really on the fine line. And I think this is the cost of living crisis is going two ways. Is people can't afford pubs because they've not got the disposable income to do it. You've got the people that have got, you know, ever increasing overheads. I mean, look, I'm in energy, you know, you haven't got to tell me about what's going on with energy prices. I know they're coming down now, finally, thank God, knock on wood, that they're not going to shoot back up again. But at the same time, if we're in a position where, you know, we've got this double whammy of prices going up, hopefully now inflation's settling down, hopefully the Bank of England starts reducing rates, and that starts releasing a bit of money back into the economy through, you know, lower rents, lower mortgages and stuff like that, and lower borrowing costs, not just for businesses but for at home as well. What do you think is going to be next then, in terms of where does the economy go from there in terms of looking for growth? Sarah, you were saying high costs and high loan repayments and stuff. What is the next steps for the hospitality sector to get out of this? That's to everybody. Anyone can answer that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see with the new government what sort of things people are lobbying for immediately. I mean, VAT has been a huge one that, you know, the likes of Sacha Lord, etc., and the NTIA have been lobbying heavily on a VAT cut. So we'll see. But things like live music venues, ticket prices, you know, VAT on those types of things, where you've got, again, that experience, a different type of venue. But again, you've got different issues for different types, different corners of the hospitality industry.